Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Data Strategies for the 5G Era, sponsored by Google Cloud. Before we begin, I will cover a few housekeeping items. On the left-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, please type your questions into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any difficulties, please click on the yellow help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green resource list widget. Near the end of today's presentation, please take 1 minute to complete the survey that's open on your screen. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to Heavy Reading's Research Director, Cloud and Security, Jim Hodges.
Thanks, operator, and welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is entitled Data Strategies for the 5G Era. My name is Jim Hodges, and I'll be moderating today's session. So as the title indicates, in today's webinar, we're really going to be focusing on really why 5G is driving service providers to really consider new approaches and strategies for how they handle data. And this includes how they utilize analytics and also OSS BSS systems. So let me first introduce today's speakers. So we have with us two speakers from Google Cloud and from Nokia. So joining us today and presenting are Matt Anderson. Matt is head of Cloud IT Telecom Solutions at Google Cloud. Welcome, Matt. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your role at Google Cloud.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jim. So at Google Cloud, I'm responsible for all of the solutions we develop for CSPs. I work closely with our product and engineering teams, as well as our broad set of ecosystem partners like Jonah and the folks at Nokia to really drive solutions to deliver business outcomes for CSP customers. Additionally, I spend a good chunk of my time on go-to-market strategies with our CSP customers as we look to sell, their best-of-breed connectivity solutions plus our, leading-edge cloud and platform solutions to other industries. Really excited for the discussion today, and thanks for the opportunity, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Okay, Jonah, welcome, Jonah. So Jonah Pransky is head of monetization business applications for cloud and network services at Nokia. Welcome, Jonah. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your role at Nokia.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jim, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So, I head up the monetization business line that falls in our business applications group within Nokia. So that entails everything having to do with our converged charging products, product management, engineering, services, and care. That's all kind of under my purview.
Great. Okay, thanks. Looking forward to both of your presentations. Okay, so let me just, in terms of agenda, so we are really going to have a couple of presentations. We're going to start talking first about 5G data strategy considerations. I've got a few thoughts on that and data points. And then Matt will present on the data-driven CSP journey. And then we'll hear from Jonah about monetizing 5G capabilities. And we'll also wrap up, take some of your questions. We also have some time for our discussion between Matt and Jonah. So, we're going to really kind of cover a number of different areas here, but I think it'll give you, the audience, really good view of really some of the considerations and some of the opportunities for monetizing 5G as we move forward. We'll also be conducting 2 poll questions, so you, the audience, can give us input into some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today, and we'll also wrap up and take your Q&A as well. But before I do turn the presentation over to Matt, I'd like to first start and cover kind of briefly why I think a 5G strategy will be different from previous mobile generations. And, I really see it driven by kind of 4 sets of requirements or capabilities, really. I guess these are data everywhere, what I call automated response, service complexity, and data-driven business models. So let me start off with data everywhere. I mean, I call this data everywhere since the reality of 5G is that we really have to analyze data as well as provision and build services now really everywhere in the network, which is really driving new requirements. And that's because of, services being deployed at the edge with MEC or at the edge, public cloud, services, private cloud services, and even the RAN, which has a unique architecture. So if we start first with analytics requirements for the edge, we're really moving into now ultra low latency services, and those have to be really monitored, and there has to be analytics around the performance of these. So being able to do things like latency budget management at the edge is important. And the flip side of that from an OSS/BSS perspective is that you have to be able to also provision and bill these edge services as well. And then in the public cloud, there's a couple of considerations related to analytics and OSS/BSS. The first, I would say, data ingestion. So if some of the data is being generated in the public cloud, you have to be able to transport it potentially to another location so it can be analyzed. And also from an OSS side, you have to think about maybe integrating OSS partner data and data storage of this data from them, because obviously the move to public cloud, it's going to be much more of an ecosystem-driven partnership model. And then the private cloud is kind of the the basics, monitoring performance, and from an OSS, making sure that you're reaching and you're achieving conformance SLA goals in terms of even things like uptime and reliability. And then in the case of the RAN, because the RAN is now fully distributed, you have to think about proactive detection and automated responsible. That's going to be a key theme about today's presentation, about automation in this. But clearly, as we move to the distributed RAN, we also have to think about how, on the OSS side, about how we keep real-time records in terms of things like network resource loading, because we're using different distributed and common resources for running RAN functionality. So the number of considerations in terms of data everywhere. Also, automated response, as I said, that's a key part of this as well. I think of it in terms of data analytics and OSS/BSS. I think of it as data analysis on an analytics side, being able to perform network threat detection and response. That would be a key part of that. And then the OSS/BSS side, just think about resource usage and which services are being performed. In terms of a QoS context, you think of network performance, single domain and multi-domain. Again, some services at the edge, some in the public cloud, some are private. And then the OSS/BSS side, you have to think about proactive QoS reporting, being able to make sure that holistically you're providing a common level of services across any network. And then the multi-domain policies, being able to apply policies, whether it's security or services policies, you have to have, that means you're going to need a common baseline analytics in all domain. And the same thing with billing, you need to be able to support billing, distributed billing, and policy control. So a number of considerations, and a lot of this is going to be looking at using automated response to help with that strategy. And then service complexity here, I think it's really three parts: microservices, API exposure, obviously the 5G core is service-based architecture, which is driven by API exposure, and then what I call slice-based services. So in an analytics requirements and OSS for microservices, you have to think about network usage demographics, which pieces of microservices are being reused, and in the OSS side, how are you actually able to reuse and service provision those components. On the API side, you have to think about API request performance for ultra-low latency services. So when there's a request to actually expose an API in a network, you have to be able to measure that from an analytics perspective. And then from an OSS/BSS side, you need to consider which APIs are you using and for which applications. And then slice-based services, again, you have to be able to use analytics to determine which are the really high-value services and which ones are, from an OSS, which one can you support per slice provisioning and billing. So these are high level, and both Matt and Joan will be talking about these in a little more detail. But there's one other thing I wanted to kind of talk about here, and that is what I call data-driven business models. For some reason, I'm not sure if you can see the slide, but in the slide that I'm showing, basically, really we know that 5G is going to drive service delivery model evolution. So I've got a data point here from a previous 5G market survey that we did in 2019. I specifically took this one because it was done over 2 years ago in the kind of the pre-pandemic world, and I think it really identifies both the impacts that 5G will have on B2B and B2C service delivery models. And it's clear when we asked the survey respondents, the CSPs who took the survey, if they thought that 5G would result in a greater focus on B2B service delivery models, 95% said that it would. On the B2C side, 76% said that it would do that as well. And 63%, so more than half, felt that it would disrupt existing service delivery models. And I certainly agree with that. And when we did this, 2.5 years ago, we didn't think about B2B2C, and that's obviously something we'll be talking about as well. But this is a new model that's emerging. It's an important one because we call it B2B2C because it's really a model in which a CSP maybe sells some form of network functionality to a business, and that business takes the capability and adds some sort of value and then sells it to X, and that could be another business or some other capability. But an example might be we're seeing with slicing, where a CSP sells a network slice to a business, and that business adds some value or does something to it, and maybe turns and sells it to another business. So this is something as well. And the key point I want to make here is that all these business models, the disruption and also the introduction of a new B2B2C model, they all impact analytics and OSS BSS systems. So those are some of the kind of key takeaways I wanted to give you for that. Before we get to Matt's presentation, I want to stop and conduct our first poll question. And as I said, we're going to be talking quite a bit about AI and machine learning and automation. So we're going to take the first poll question here. So the question is, in which areas are you focusing AI, machine learning, and automation investment? And you can select up to 2. So if you can do that now, that would really be appreciated. So, okay, so and maybe Matt, while we're waiting here, we're going to be talking to you about being a data-driven model. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, I don't want to give away steal your thunder, but in terms of you're dealing with a lot of customers about automation, do you think that automation is something that these CSPs really understand in terms of what some of all the benefits are, or are we still in early stages?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Jim. I mean, I guess in my discussions with CSPs, I think there's fairly broad understanding of the advantages of automation and what it can drive. I think the journey to a truly kind of integrated automation platform that enables some of those capabilities, I think, is where the rubber meets the road, right? It's easy for us to talk about, hey, streamlining activities, cutting humans out of specific parts of processes. That all sounds great, but I think it's really about how do we go implement those platforms that drive automation? How do we ensure we close that feedback loop so when we start doing automation, we know that A, it's being successful, or B, we can learn from the errors that didn't work out and continue to adjust going forward. And I think that's where you get kind of the power of automation plus the power of AI and ML that really starts to bring some of those, observed realities or objectives to reality in terms of, driving that efficiency through automation. Okay, let's see what the audience said here. Okay. Quite a few here. So the leading 2, I guess, so like I said, top 3. The leading one, 53% network planning optimization, and then 49% operations and assurance, 38% customer experience, and then 24% network data monetization, and then 9% marketing campaigns. So I expected network planning to be up there. I didn't necessarily assume it would be the first one, but yeah, this is kind of what I sort of assumed on a, I guess, high level. Matt, any surprises from your perspective? Probably not. I mean, I would have said planning and optimization would have been up there. Ops and assurance, it definitely makes sense. Maybe the marketing stuff, I don't know. Maybe that becomes difficult, just marrying up network data plus customer data all into something that is, manageable, thinking about cross silos of the business. Maybe that's too difficult or very difficult right now. But I think generally this is probably in line with what I expected.
Okay, great. So I'm going to finish the presentation, and you're going to actually give us some insights into actually CSPs becoming data-driven. So I'll push out your first slide. Please go ahead.
Yep, thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. So, just talking a little bit about the journey here, right? CSPs started using data warehouses as kind of the foundation for operational reporting. Things like daily sales reports, inventory reports, those types of capabilities, right? They increasingly want to enable their business analysts to carry out ad hoc analysis. Obviously that requires the use of self-service, business intelligence tools, those type of capabilities, really, try to make it possible to not have to engage your IT organization for, all of those ad hoc analysis. I think that's kind of the next step in the journey, right? beyond that, really looking to mine then the right data, right, stored in their data warehouses, not just in their silo of the organization, but across the organization, as as most of CSPs have multiple data warehouses. And then finally, kind of performing that ad hoc analysis to uncover correlations, identify patterns, detect anomalies, right? Ideally, kind of back to Jim's point that we just talked about, how do we do this in an automated manner, which really takes us to kind of that fourth kind of step of the journey, right? Autonomous, right? Really taking that aspiration of becoming a data-driven business. Try to harness the rich data across their data warehouses, abstract that complexity of interacting with different data warehouses, use predictive analytics models and operationalize those into predictive insights. Obviously it requires that the data warehouse supports, machine learning initiatives and a robust automation framework to support these actions. And like I said before, ensure that as you take actions in an automated manner, you can close that feedback loop to ensure that, hey, we got the right result that was expected, or B, we need to go tweak it. So really, taking those outcomes, tying them back into your model and using that to inform the next set of activities. At Google, we're really focused on using data and advanced analytics to help CSPs kind of across these 5 transformation areas. Jim said it before, but network planning and optimization, we want to help CSPs answer questions like, where should I build out my network? When should I build my network? What should I be building there? And probably most importantly, how do I get the best return on investment, from the limited amount of dollars we all have to spend, building out the network and really prioritizing that in the right manner. From an operations and service assurance perspective, really focusing on helping CSPs reduce that order to cash time frame, as well as trouble to repair intervals, and generally making the back office as efficient as possible. On the care and experience management front, answering questions like, how can I deliver a better user experience, not just for external users, but also for internal users. Any user of these platforms, there's an opportunity to improve that experience and to drive better service for those people. Also, can I utilize a 360-degree view of the customer to better understand their needs and to anticipate what they might be, engaging me for, whether it's an outage, whether it's, a billing dispute, whatever it may be. And then I think targeted marketing, I know it was low on the list from a poll question perspective, but really helping CSPs use network data in addition to customer data to better target their potential customers, reducing churn, improving conversion rates, getting more value for their campaigns, those types of things, right? I do think there is an opportunity to use the rich set of data that comes out of the network to really improve, targeted marketing capabilities. Last but not least, right, network data monetization. Fundamentally, how do we help CSPs monetize the massive amounts of data and the richness of that data that they possess, make it, accessible, usable, and easily automated in terms of how do we drive insights and really drive the ability to monetize the network. From our perspective, we really continue to be that ecosystem-led cloud platform. We obviously have first-party solutions. We have a broad set of third-party ecosystem partners that we continue to validate and onboard to both GCP as well as our new Edge Cloud platform, and really trying to work with the CSPs to say, look, let's meet you where you are, understand your capabilities. You may not need the entire stack of GCP, analytics, ingestion, AI capabilities, but we've got components that could really drive value there. And so really building on kind of that heritage of Google being an expert from a data and analytics perspective. In terms of, what our solutions are really focused on, addressing kind of the current challenges that are out there, right? There's a lot of human effort required to monitor the network and react to performance impacting events. I'm sure, those on the call here can look at these and say, hey, I acutely aware of these issues and these challenges, right? Current statistical approaches do little to unearth root cause. create alarm fatigue across the organization. Time and usage-based maintenance planning can lead to unnecessary repair costs, as well as potentially outages that that didn't need to happen in the first place. Traditional methods sometimes slow to adapt to the changing dynamics of cloud-native autonomous networks, especially when you start thinking about distributed RAN. And then I think really that focus on downtime avoidance is really a very facility-level problem versus how do I look at it at a facility level, but then roll it up to a global perspective to potentially identify or understand some other trends that may be out there that are causing this, right? From a cloud or Google Cloud perspective, we think we can help automate detection of at-risk assets, free up resources to work on more value-adding tasks, while also planning for outages and automating those responses, right? I think we spend a lot of time with our Google Global Network team understanding how they operate our network at scale, how they utilize a lot of these capabilities in terms of moving really towards an autonomous network and trying to bring those where relevant, obviously, but how do we bring those to CSPs and some of those best practices? We can also help uncover root cause and patterns undetectable to human observation analysis, plan maintenance based on data-driven predictions, and avoid unnecessary preventative maintenance and downtime, help adopt a solution that accounts for current conditions, automated retraining to ensure you can learn from previous events, and kind of the success or failure of automated actions and making sure we close that loop. And then finally, take that global view of at-risk assets. Obviously, there's a lot of data required to move from a facility level view of what's going on, tie that into a global view. But I think that's where cloud and specifically Google excel from a data analytics perspective. Our approach continues to evolve as we learn from our CSP customers, from our implementations, from our proof of concepts, from our joint exercises we do together. And as I said before, we do spend a good amount of time looking internally at our global network team, understanding how they are driving towards autonomous networks, how they view outages, analytics, AI, what they're willing to hand off to a machine to go cover versus what a human still needs to do, and really looking at that and then applying some of those capabilities and lessons learned to CSPs. In terms of really looking at data monetization and saying the things I just talked about were really more focused on using network analytics to kind of improve service delivery or improve network planning, really kind of internal to the CSP. I think there's an opportunity, obviously, to use that data to monetize with the CSP customers, right? There's numerous use cases I think that we all probably are acutely aware of for monetizing network data. But I'd say we consistently get asked about kind of the three cases I've called out here on the screen, right? And not to say that these are obviously the only ones. Like I said, there's a lot out there, but these are probably the three where we get the most interest from customers, right? From a site planning perspective, really monetizing location intelligence by targeting third-party businesses, primarily in two key vertical areas, retail and consumer product goods, using that location intelligence to understand when, where potential visitors come to retail stores and business points of presence and their socio-demographic profiles so that, the companies can target them in a better way. And then I think conversely on the public sector front, potentially, if you look at Smart City, analyze areas of cities that are visited, when and by whom, what part of the population, really aid in better planning of facilities, bus stops, even you think about city planning, hotels, development, all those kind of things. So really, site planning has been an interesting one that we've got a lot of interest from CSPs and from their customers in terms of how we enable that. From a geo-marketing perspective, not vastly different than the site planning, maybe just a different use of that data, but still, once again, kind of that location information, monitor footfall, socio-demographic information, points of interest, data in key locations, where are they going in stores, where are they going in airports and stadiums, those types of things, to really better understand the number of visitors, where they're from, and what they're doing, and kind of, from a footfall perspective, where exactly they are in their stores and what they're looking at. And then leveraging these insights, the businesses can take direct action via targeted marketing to achieve, both greater brand awareness as well as, return on investment from their campaigns. And then finally here, fleet management, really helping to visualize the fleet assets, optimize their activity, leveraging kind of real-time data, including traffic, weather, routing, even tying in customer data there potentially from the BSS of, hey, this person has been unhappy, they've called 10 times. How do we factor that all into how you prioritize customers from a next service perspective if you're rolling a truck somewhere? Obviously, you can also drive greater fleet asset protection by truly understanding kind of where your trucks are, analyze driver performance, were they speeding, were they on their phone, a lot of different information there, and then kind of monitor the state of the fleet with vehicle telematics, right? So, I think there's obviously a ton that goes into that ecosystem to enable these use cases. The network data is a component of that. But I think at Google, we're really focused on how do we enable that ecosystem on a scalable platform, for our customers to use, whether that customer is a CSP or whether we're selling with a CSP to an end enterprise. With that, Jonah, I'll hand it over to you for your section.
Great, thanks a lot, Matt. Appreciate it. So I want to talk a little bit about different strategies that CSPs are looking for in terms of monetizing 5G capabilities. Amongst those are kind of data and the data coming off the network. So we did a little bit of research a couple months back, and some of this stuff, I won't go into everything here, but it leads us to the reasoning why service providers are looking at evolving their BSS systems, certainly their charging systems, right? So 65% plan to have multiple slice 5G solutions available in the next 2 years. 75% of enterprise applications are planning to use 10 or more external data sources. If you look at the type of rating and charging models that are popular, and the top 3 there are blue because they were consistent across every region we talked to. Quality of service, speed, latency, so on. Usage, but not only volume per gigabyte, but also duration and time and things of that nature. And then different payment mechanisms, cryptocurrencies, tokens, and stuff like that. Dynamic pricing came in soon after that. So all of those things are very interesting and informative for what the CSP market is looking to monetize in 5G. 60% of new revenue will be thought to come from B2B to X models, B2B to C, B2B to B, or so on. 70% are looking at deploying BSS via public clouds, such as Google. So all of this leads us to that 98%, right? That CSPs surveyed saying, hey, we need to alter in some way our BSS to support 5G. So, whether it's all their BSS, whether it's, some of the parts that are closer to the network, like the charging piece, that remains to be seen, and probably is a case-by-case basis for CSPs out there. This leads us to say, in order to monetize these 5G capabilities, you really need to do 3 kind of main things, right? The modernization of the charging system for monetizing 5G capabilities. That seems a little general, but the fact of the matter is, in order to do some of the things that we'll be talking about, you need to be looking at cloud native, you need to be looking about microservices, containerization, and so on. But perhaps what I'll focus on more for presentation is developing a unified capability exposure. So the ability to, if we're going to do B2B to X, and we're going to monetize that, 60% of the new money is going to be coming from there. A lot of that is going to be exposing capabilities from the network to other people as part of an ecosystem to use as they see fit and monetize that capability. So you need to either monetize the exposure of that capability, but also your monetization capabilities need to be exposed. So it's a sort of double-sided model there. And then enable secure and trusted data exchange in a multi-party environment. I'll talk about that a little bit, but certainly when we talk about providing data to an ecosystem of users, you want to be able to have secure transactions, secure contracts, secure settlement, and so on. So if you look a little bit into this, what we're looking at in Nokia is saying, hey, you know what, there is the network layer and obviously the control and data layer, which includes the charging, the orchestration, security. All of those services need to be consumable as code, right? So, APIs are a good way to think of that. The network as code is going to be exposed to those application partners, those analytics vendors, data partners, enterprise customers, whether directly or as part of some sort of participation in or cooperation with CSPs. So using those APIs and exposing them in some sort of standardized framework, either through some sort of capability or service exposure layer, using new standards that are becoming very, very well accepted in TMF APIs, for instance, Apogee as a services exposure layer. These really do contribute to the whole concept of network as code. So just to reiterate there, so you're going to be exposing the capabilities of your network, monetizing the exposure of those capabilities. And then again, as you see here, the charging and mediation are contributing factors to all of that network as code as well, so that we can also offer monetization services to the larger ecosystem. If I continue on, I get a little bit specific about how we're seeing network capability and network data monetization as part of the overall view of where the charging function plays a piece in enabling that sort of data marketplace. We look specifically at two key functions of the network. So you've got the network data and analytics function, the NWDAF. That's going to give you a lot of insights into how your network is performing, and then the ability to monetize those insights, use those as a dimension for monetization. So how well the network slice that you sold to an enterprise customer actually performed, the load performance analytics, the user experience, those are all monetizable dimensions of service that are pretty new to the CSP industry, right? We're kind of used to counting bits and bytes. We know we want to get into quality of service, but we know that our enterprise customers or high value customers are going to ask that we commit to a certain level of service, and the NWDAF through the CHF is going to help us to monetize that level of service and that commitment. And then you've got the network exposure function, the NEF, which is going to say, hey, you know what, we've got all these capabilities to use voice, send message, tell me about location, things of that nature for the devices that are on your network. We want to be able to monetize those in a couple of different ways, and it goes back to what I was saying. We want to be able to monetize every call to the network exposure function. So think of it as monetizing an API call, but we also want to have the CHF contribute to that monetization exposure function framework, so that if this, ecosystem that you see maybe on the right-hand side says, hey, I want to include network services as part of the service I bring to market, and I don't want to build my own charging capabilities for that, well, I can take the capabilities from the network provider themselves. So those are the really two aspects that we're taking of exposing capabilities to the network, exposing the capabilities that network offers and exposing the capabilities to understand better what's happening on the network and monetize that understanding and those insights. If I look a little bit and to use some examples of what we mean and how it would be a little bit different than the way we think about how we monetize these things today. So I'll take two examples, Iot Fleetmatics, right? Matt mentioned those earlier, right? So if we look at kind of the way we do that today, right? We perhaps monetize the number of tracking sensors that we've activated on the network, or maybe we're even still looking at the data consumed by those sensors or those IoT devices. Tomorrow we'll look at the number of trucks that are active at a certain time, the number of times they actually access the network, where they were when they accessed the network. if we look at the different network functions, really the NEF is the one that's going to help us do things differently, right? The NSMF is going to help us as well, the slice management function in terms of SLAs. But if I refer back to what I was talking about earlier, the NEF will say, hey, well, this is the location that this device was at this time, and provide another dimension for charging for that service. Similarly for cloud gaming, right? So if we are charging, let's say, volume-based, or it's part of your regular data package, tomorrow we can talk about the number of players on the game, the duration of the gameplay, the quality of service, and that can be either for direct to the consumer or looking at the gaming provider as your customer. The NWDAF is going to play a big role there, right? So the metrics of the network slice that you promised to your customer, those will be the dimensions on which they're charged when it comes to the end of the day, when it comes to the actual consumption. Not the volume necessarily, but the volume that is juxtaposed with what you promised in terms of the network slice. You'll see a little bit about charging, moving CHF to the edge there at the bottom. And that really does play a part for both of these examples. If we think about cloud gaming as kind of a low latency use case, then moving the CHF to the edge and enabling that to be a very, very low latency, high frequency piece of the session control flow, we can understand why we would want the charging out at the edge in order to make that happen. But even for things like IoT, there's a lot of benefits to moving charging out to the edge so that we can cut down on some of the signaling traffic that is going from the network to the charging, especially for things like sensors, which maybe are kind of lower value events that we want to charge for. We certainly want to keep our costs down there as well. So when we talk about charging at the edge, we really are making a distinction about whether or not we're charging for edge services, which is going to be an important topic for CSPs. But charging at the edge has some very, very specific use cases, and it'll also have a very, very specific kind of deployment model and the specific functionality that will be required there in order to accomplish what we were talking about in terms of low latency or cost reduction. So, Jim, that's all I had for now. I'm looking forward to the discussion and the conversation. So I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thanks, Jonah. So first of all, Matt and Jonah, thanks for giving those presentations. Very focused, gave myself and the audience like an excellent view of some of the drivers and how this is all going to come together. But I thought we would take a few minutes before we get to Q&A just to talk about maybe some of these related discussion points and discussion topics. And one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about is, and I touched on it and you both touched on it, is the edge. It's a real game changer in terms of how we leverage analytics, how we support 5G data systems and OSS, BSS. And it's just a bit of a loaded question for you, but maybe I'll give you both an opportunity to think are there sort of certain best practices for monetizing edge scenarios? And there's a couple of questions in here related to that they're just been kind of flowing in while we've been presenting about use cases. But I'm just wondering, we'll talk about maybe the specific ones, but are there sort of some best practices? You talked about NWDAF, talked about network exposure. Matt, you talked about different, the role of automation. I mean, I guess at a high level, and maybe Matt, I'll let you come into this one first. Do you see any sort of best practices for helping monetize these?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's really, how do you best understand the use case or set of use cases that you're trying to enable? And I think really deconstructing those down to, what has to be done at the edge, what has to have a certain set of processes to enable the edge, what data needs to stay on the edge, what data needs to come back. I think as you start to really think about exactly where all of that stuff lands, you then have a view of, hey, look, I think I can make money on these types of scenarios, or maybe I can't, and I need to come at it from a different way. So I think it's looking at the piece part components of enabling that use case, how those start to, work together and add up, and almost, putting kind of that, economic case around that use case based on those building components or building blocks, and then using that to really understand, is this a valid use case from an edge perspective, or what do I need to change to make it more viable in the market, right? So I think always understanding kind of that market side of it and the economic side of it is really important, because I think there's a lot of really cool stuff that, that cloud providers are doing, that CSPs are doing from an edge perspective. But I think, when push comes to shove, is how do we make money on that, and how do we make a profitable business out of it, right? So I think it's really, ensuring that that's always in the back of your head as you start to build this up, right? Because, looking at it from a technical perspective, obviously that's an important step, but it has to be, kind of in parallel with it, with an economic view of can I actually go enable this and drive value and drive a profitable scenario out of it.
Right. Which really isn't that different from the things service providers do for other services. I think what you're saying is what we've seen in this presentation is that the scenarios are much more complex. So that's why you have to be much more data driven. Okay. Jonah?
Yeah, sorry. I was just barging in already. Yeah, and so I'll take it from the sort of the charging perspective, right? And what I think the best practice is to be hyper modular with your monetization capabilities, because the use cases are varied. So if we look at an edge scenario to provide a kind of low latency use case like we were talking about before, so then you certainly don't want to deploy a full, what we would call, converged charging system for 5G there, right? Because you'd want the edge to just control exactly what needs in order for the call flow to be done really, really quickly with no latency, and then be able to call back to a CHF or a larger CCS, converged charging system, within the core. But then again, if you look at edge as sort of being part of a local private network, then yeah, maybe you do want to deploy a fuller CCS for an enterprise customer to use and utilize all those capabilities for that. So depending on the edge scenario, you're going to want to be hyper modular with the monetization capabilities that you're deploying there. So that's what I would say is the best practice.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, okay, let's move. One other topic we want to talk about, and this is of interest to me, is data monetization is becoming really interwoven or interwoven with some of these different ecosystem partner services. We talked about B2B to X models. So I guess the question is, how important are ecosystem partners in growing this? I mean, obviously you need the partnerships in any sort of environment, but and I guess I guess what I'm trying to get into this one is these B2B to X models are pretty dynamic. So there's going to be different ecosystem partnerships probably for different ones. But is it fair to say that these partnerships will be also a key point of how we actually monetize these scenarios, whether they're edge or public cloud or private cloud? And maybe, Jonah, we got you up here, maybe let you go with this one first.
Yeah, so I think ecosystem partners are going to be very important for B2B to X. I think that for any sort of enterprise or governmental agency that's looking to provide services to, let's say, other enterprises or other agencies, they're certainly going to be able to provide a certain platform for those types of services. They'll be able to provide maybe their core services, but that's not going to be everything for that enterprise or whatever that X may be. So, having ecosystem partners in order to flesh out that full offering is incredibly important. Now, once you do that, you have the complexity of how do I make sure that all the contracts are secure, that all the agreements are clear, that the settlement between those partners is done in a quick, efficient manner, and most importantly, that no revenue is lost in the transition. So the ecosystem partners are incredibly important, but managing that partnership is probably of equal importance once you get that into play.
Yeah, good point. Okay, Matt, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, totally agree with what Jonas said there, right? I think, the ecosystem is probably the key to success here. There's not one party, whether it's the CSP, the end enterprise, the cloud platform, that's going to bring all of the capabilities or even anything close to all the capabilities. I thought I was going to say something really, really powerful, but Jonah already covered it, right? I think the marketplace concept of how do we handle all of, the settlement and make sure there's no revenue leakage and the billing and all of that stuff. But most importantly, how do you do that without, showing that complexity to the users here? And I think that becomes part and parcel of making sure your ecosystem is healthy and growing. I think the flip side of that also is, how do you build a platform that enables, fairly rapid onboarding of new, vendor capabilities, of new ISVs that are out there that are, hey, the bleeding edge capabilities that are going after the hottest use case, right? And I think enabling the ecosystem to grow, but also ensuring that it's a very industrialized kind of back office process where everyone is sharing in the success becomes super important.
Okay, great. Okay, so there's a couple other ones I wanted to cover. We're running a little bit short on time, so we may not get to all of them, but this one I think is important as well. It kind of goes, it's a bit tied to the first one about best practices, but the question is, what steps must CSPs take to shift from traditional network planning, operations assurance, data monetization, and customer care silos? Obviously, as we move to the cloud, it's going to be a significantly long journey in terms of which applications, and obviously these types of services will still be supported in a traditional network. But maybe what steps do you think that they have to take to sort of help move them away from that? And maybe Matt, I'll bring you in here first.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and maybe it's making it too simplistic, but I really think it's how do you get a kind of end-to-end, top-to-bottom, more horizontal view of these silos you call out here, right? Planning kind of typically had its own silo. Operations assurance has its own silo. Customer care had its own silo. It's almost how do you turn those on their side to ensure you've kind of got that ability to look across those silos and the data that's in there, tie that data together, correlate that data, drive insights off of that, build models off of that, right? I think that's really, how you really be able to take advantage of kind of the rich data you have across these silos, tie them together, whether it's monetize that data, drive operational efficiency, whatever it may be. I mean, I think that's probably the key step there. I think, CSPs are great at ingesting data. CSPs have, great data warehouses that are focused on these silos, but I think how do you blend those all together and start to go after kind of those end-to-end use cases that really, become game changers for them?
Okay, great, thanks. Jonah, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I do think that some of these silos, once we start talking about, exposure capability, capability exposure, sorry, I think that that's going to help CSPs really change the way they operate their business. So if we think back to, the network as code concept that I was talking about before, that's not only network functions, right? So all of these things really are contributing to that network as code capability. So it's not only for fueling ecosystems and other people to use your capabilities, but as a CSP, you can really shape and focus what your business looks like, how you approach your customers, by having a much more free and open approach and access to all the capabilities for all these products that exist in these different silos within your business, right? And so it's always been a bit difficult to do, but once we start to open up these systems, that'll be a lot easier.
Okay, great. There's one other point I want to get to, but I want to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A as well. So, and maybe, Jonah, this one, and Matt, feel free to jump in as well, but I'll start with you on this one because on your first slide, you talked about sort of the 3 steps to monetization. You talked about, basically secured data exchange in a multi-party environment. So I'm just wondering, as somebody who follows the security area for the last 4 or 5 years, we're definitely going to see a lot more data transfer, data exchange in a 5G world, slicing. Someone's going to be on net, someone's going to be off net, third parties. So I guess I'd like to get your thoughts on you. How challenging do you think will it be to enable that you can support secure, trusted data exchange in a multi-party or network environment?
So, I mean, I think firstly, we need to say that, like you said, right, how much more important this is going to become. It's already an issue everywhere, but frankly, when data is part of the product, right, data is part of the service, it's critical for the service to be actually reasonably useful to a consumer or an enterprise. We definitely need to make sure that that data is secure. So, I think that is a major challenge, right? If we just look at the question, yes, it's going to be very challenging. I think we're looking at using, distributed ledger, blockchain type of technologies in that data exchange for multi-party environments. And we've got some customers that are using our Nokia data marketplace for that. So I think that there are solutions, but it's something that we need to constantly stay ahead of, just knowing how important the data exchange is going to be in creating new services in these different types of scenarios that we were talking about earlier, with ecosystems of different service providers consuming network data and then packaging that together with the services they bring to market.
Okay, great, thanks. Matt, do you want to add anything to this, or?
Yeah, I think he touched on the one thing from a ledger perspective that we have a lot of focus on. I think as well, when you think about the cloud part of the ecosystem here, you think about all the data sovereignty, data residency requirements that we continue to see pop up in Europe and elsewhere in the world. How does all of that factor in from an underlying, enabling that trusted data exchange with a lot of those requirements baked in, right? It's how do you try and stay ahead of this, as Jonah said, and how do you plan for a lot of these requirements and very useful and needed security capabilities, but how do you plan for that and so you don't get caught off guard when you're enabling this or have to change a bunch of stuff you've already done? So I think just probably add that to what he said.
Great, okay, thanks. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there. So first of all, Matt and Jonah, thank you for the excellent presentations. Let's get to the Q&A, but before we do, I just wanted to also conduct our second and final poll question. We'll start taking questions while the audience is giving us their input. So the question is, how prepared is your organization to monetize 5G data? We talked a lot about the opportunities, the drivers, and some of the best practices. So the opportunity, or I guess the options are we're ready, somewhat ready, not ready, or not sure. So if you can give us your input into that, that would be helpful and be really valuable to us as we go into the Q&A. So, but while we're doing that, I was kind of just looking at some of the questions that are coming in here. We've got quite a few questions in the last 8 or 9 minutes. And they kind of go back to what we talked about in terms of use cases, but there's kind of and I'm not sure, and Matt and Jonah, feel free to not respond to this one, but there was a question specific about monetization systems that Google and Nokia are commercially using in networks. And if you can, you've obviously talked about the use cases. Can you give the audience any sort of example of maybe a customer that you're working with that you're using both these systems together?
So let me start. I mean, we've got a long history in the charging business, but our latest and greatest product is actually being used in CSP networks in over 20 operators around the world, including tier ones in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific. Some really interesting ones. We've got some governmental agencies that are doing interesting things with B2B2C, including providing metering of water and electricity and things like that, and using what is traditionally a telco monetization system to do just that. So that's pretty interesting. And then we're now embarking on the integrations with new 5G standalone network functions as our customers start to roll out 5G standalone capabilities. That is really the next big challenge and next big milestone for the industry as they start to roll out that next step in the 5G evolution.
Okay, great. Thanks. Matt, anything you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I would just say from our perspective, right? I think Google Cloud and Google more broadly has always been a ecosystem, open ecosystem driven company, right? And I think when you think about charging capabilities, we want to give our customers options, right? Obviously, we've got Nokia's charging function validated on GCP, very cloud native, right? That should drive not just from a charging perspective, great capabilities, but just from an IT operations perspective, great capabilities as well. Jonah mentioned it. How do you think about validating, 5G core functions on our cloud platform as well? So really, we continue to drive and to focus on building that ecosystem of partners to give our customers choice.
Okay, great. Okay, let's see what we left the audience out there for a while. Let's see what the audience said in terms of that. Well, 33% aren't sure where they are in terms of monetizing 5G data, which I think is fair. And then only 8% said they're ready, and pretty much split. 30% said they're either somewhat ready or not ready. And I'm not too surprised by this. I didn't expect there to be too many we are ready, and that's obviously why we're having this webinar today to start the dialogue. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. I want to get to some more Q&A, but Matt or Jonah, any surprises here? Either one of you want to jump in and give me your thoughts on this one?
I would say that's a good trend. When we did our research a couple of months back, I think the number of people that said they were ready was something like 2%. So, congratulations to the industry for continuing to move forward. But it's not surprising. What I see really jives with what we're seeing. It also jives with where we are in our in the projects that we're doing with our customers. Right, we're reaching that readiness stage.
And that makes sense too, because we're still rolling the 5G core, so that's another key part of that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's go into Q&A. So there's a couple of interesting questions here, and I want to get to at least two of them. There was one about, we talked about and I talked about the relationship between analytics and OSS and monetization. And the question here is interesting. Can existing billing systems keep up with monetization of edge analytics? Kind of more data, more records, more everything. And I don't know, maybe Jonah, you've got your camera on. Maybe I'll jump to you first. What do you think of this? I mean, obviously, we want to talk about NWDAP. That's a huge step forward in terms of 5G actually defining a network data analytics function. So that's a big part of, I think, increasing the performance of analytics. But then, on the other side of that, you need to be able to support all those functionalities in OSS, BSS systems. Yeah. So what are your thoughts here?
So I'm going to assume that, the question kind of refers to billing as a domain, right? Because billing systems is a very diverse set of features and functionality and modules, right? So assuming that we're talking about this domain called billing, I would say that some parts don't need a ton of adjustment in order to handle that. But I would say anything that needs to touch the network, anything that needs to integrate and interwork with new network functions that were never asked to be done in the 4G world. So the 4G OCS didn't have to do it, but the 5G CHF is going to be asked to do it. Then no. The answer is existing billing systems, as far as that part that is to touch the network, is not ready to handle the monetization of the edge and analytics, at least not in the way that we were talking about it earlier. So I would say that do you have to rip and replace your entire billing system? I don't want to say that that's what needs to be done, but there's certainly elements for the 5G standalone core that touch that billing domain that are going to need to be updated. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna move forward to one last question, and maybe Matt, I'll leave this one off with you. And it's we talked about best practices. This question is coming at it a little different. Basically it's in your conversations with CSPs, what has been the biggest barrier to 5G monetization? So Matt, I'll let you run with this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably get varying answers depending on regionality, probably more than anything, right? I think we see themes in North America versus Europe versus APAC, for instance. But I think in terms of monetization, you know, I think there's generally, look, the networks are just being rolled out in different levels of maturity and different levels of scale. How do I ensure I'm getting the right stuff, the right information off of that, and I'm using it properly? I still think there's some, you know, I don't want to say trial and error, but there's still some growing pains that operators are going through in terms of, you know, what does my kind of data governance, data platform strategy look like associated with kind of the monetization of 5G data. And I think that's probably the biggest thing of, you know, how do you look out a year or two ahead and ensure that what I put in place is going to be scalable. It's going to be you know, capturing the right information, analyzing it in the right way, those types of things. I think so. I think there's concern around how do I future-proof stuff to be able to handle it going forward, just given where we're at in the life cycle of 5G, you know, kind of more on the nascent end of this versus, you know, the mature side of it.
Okay, great. So great response. And we'll have to come back in a couple of years and do this again. But first of all, we're going to wrap it up there. So first of all, Matt and Jonah, thank you for the presentations and your thoughts on some of the discussion topics and for answering the audience questions. I'd also like to thank the audience for attending today's session. We had some excellent presentations, some excellent dialogues. Again, thank you for the audience for submitting to the poll questions and providing some input. As the operator said at the beginning of the call, before you log off, you can take the survey. It'll help us plan for future sessions. And also, again, so thank you, audience, for attending today's session. So for Light Reading, this is Jim Hodges. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.